Hello, in this video I will review Chapter 10, Books and the Power of Print. Here's a quote from Jeff Bezos, the chief executive of Amazon. He says, quote, "We had high hopes that e-books, outselling print books, would happen eventually, but we never imagined it would happen this quickly. Yes, the book industry has come a long way. Before books, you may remember, we had the oral era of communication, where cultures passed information and values through communities, elders, or tribal storytellers. And then we transitioned to the written era with the development of the alphabet, which led to books. The Egyptians began writing on papyrus as early as 2400 BCE. Papyrus is where the word paper is derived from. Egyptians made this early form of paper from plant reeds found along the Nile River. Reeds would be rolled into scrolls. Other parts of the world were looking for materials to write on. Importing papyrus from Egypt to Europe was expensive, so parchment was used. Parchment is treated animal skins, and it replaced papyrus in Europe because it was smoother, more durable, and less expensive because it wasn't imported from Egypt. Codex is the first proto-modern book. The Codex was developed by the Romans in the 4th century. Codex is a type of book made of sheets of parchment paper and sewn together along the edges and then bound together with thin pieces of wood and leather. Unlike a scroll, the codex could be opened to any page. Writing on both sides of parchment was also possible for the first time. The Christian clergy influenced what has become known as the manuscript culture during the Middle Ages. These large books were painstakingly lettered, decorated, and bound by hand. This was the entrepreneurial stage of the evolution of books. Members of the church produced illuminated manuscripts, which incorporated into the manuscripts the use of decorative, colorful designs and illustrations. These books were made for churches or wealthy clients. The producers of these large and beautiful books were called scribes. They were usually priests and monks who advanced the art of bookmaking. They became the chief caretakers of recorded history and culture, and they were also gatekeepers, promoting ideas they favored and censoring ideas that didn't agree with contemporary Christian thought. Scribes would be considered the earliest professional editors. During this period, the scribes developed rules for punctuation. They made distinctions between small and capital letters, and they placed spaces between words to make reading easier. And now the innovations of block printing and the printing press. To make mechanically produced copies of pages, Chinese printers developed block printing. Block printing was developed by the Chinese in the 3rd century. It's a technique in which sheets of paper were applied to blocks of inked wood with raised surfaces depicting hand-carved letters and illustrations. It constituted the basic technique used for printing newspapers, magazines, and books. It enabled multiple copies to be printed and bound together, and the oldest printable book still in existence is China's Diamond Sutra from the year 868 CE. Marco Polo brought movable type to Europe after visiting China in the year 1295. The first block-printed books appeared in Europe during the 15th century. Movable type was first invented in China around the year 1000. It featured individual characters made from reusable pieces of wood or metal. Printers arranged characters into various word combinations. This sped up the time it took to create block pages. This process developed in Europe independently in the 15th century. The printing press was developed by Johannes Gutenberg in Germany between the years 1453 and 1456. It used principles of movable type and the design of wine presses to develop the mechanical printing press. It produced the first so-called modern books. It used vellum, which was a calfskin-based parchment paper. Printing presses spread throughout Europe in the late 15th century. The first English book to be printed in book form was the Canterbury Tales. The books were large, elaborate, and expensive, and took months to publish. Books were purchased usually by aristocrats, royal families, religious leaders, and ruling politicians. Gradually, printers reduced the size of books and used less expensive grades of paper, making books cheaper so that more people could afford them. The birth of publishing in the United States began with Stephen Day and his son Matthew. They set up a print shop in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In 1640, they printed the first colonial book, the whole book of Psalms. This marked the beginning of book publishing in the colonies. By the mid-1770s, all 13 colonies had printing shops. Benjamin Franklin had one. He imported Samuel Richardson's Pamela, or Virtue, from Britain. This was the first novel reprinted and sold in colonial America. It told stories that appealed to the rising literate middle class. In the early 19th century, the demand for books was growing, so they needed to make them more affordable by using machines that made paper, using cloth covers instead of leather, and using paperback books with cheaper paper covers, which were introduced from Europe. Erastus and Irwin Beadle introduced the paperback dime novels. In 1860, they sold for 10 cents. By 1870, dime novels sold 7 million copies. By 1885, one-third of all books published in the U.S. were dime novels, or pulp fiction. That's a reference to the cheap, machine-made pulp paper they were printed on. Another invention that helped the publishing in the United States was linotype machines. In the 1880s, they enabled printers to save time by setting type mechanically using a typewriter-style keyboard, while the steam-powered and high-speed rotary presses produced more books at a cheaper cost. And offset lithography was developed in the early 1900s. This greatly reduced the cost of color and illustrations and accelerated book production. The formation of book publishing houses. Throughout the 1800s, the rapid spread of literacy as well as the Industrial Revolution spurred the emergence of the middle class and a demand for books. There were publishing houses in the 19th century, and some of today's oldest American publishing houses were made at that time. Here's a list of some of them. There was a high demand in books as life was shifting from rural to industrialized. It helped immigrants adjust to American culture. In 1910, it was a year that a lot of new book titles were released, and the amount was over 13,000, which was not beat until the 1950s. Profits were affected by World War I and World War II and the Great Depression. Book sales slumped with the competition from radio and magazines since books were more expensive. After World War II, the industry started earning more money again. There are many different types of books. The book categories in the modern book industry include trade books, professional books, textbooks, mass market paperback books, religious books, reference books, and university press books. Trade books are the most common type of book. They are hardbound or paperback, and trade books serves the general audience and are sold at retail outlets. Adult trade books include fiction, art, hobbies, and science, technology, computer, do-it-yourself, cooking. There are also juvenile through pre-K to young adult trade books. For example, Harry Potter would be considered a trade book, and it made millions of dollars. Books and comics such as X-Men or The Dark Knight and Captain America have turned from comics into movies. There's also professional books, which targets the job market, and it's meant for occupations including law and business, medicine, and technical science works. There are books on accounting. They're sold on internet or bought from someone with expertise on a certain subject. And textbooks, we all know what those are. They're for school to improve literacy and education. College textbooks will always have to be paid for by students, but luckily there are online textbooks now which have dropped regular textbook prices. There are religious books. The best-selling religious book of all time is the Bible. Sales of religious books soared after World Wars I and II, but there has been a decline of sales in religious books in recent years. Then there's the university press. They're usually nonprofit, the smallest part of the book industry, targeted for readers wanting to gain knowledge in certain areas such as history of art or specialized philosophy. They're rarely produced, these types of books, unless it is from the Oxford University Press. Generally, these types of books lose money and they have a lack of marketing budget. So, some of the trends and issues in book publishing, the book industry tries to ensure success by creating bestsellers and working with both traditional authors and celebrities, in addition to licensing books for film and television and investing in the audio and ebook format. By the 1990s, the book industry had become deeply interdependent with the television and film industries. So, how can TV help sell books? Well, we see promotion by talk show hosts such as Oprah Winfrey, and books serve as ideas for TV shows and movies. Game of Thrones on HBO and Dexter on Showtime, and Life of Pi and J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series all came from books. Another major development in publishing has been the merger of sound recording with publishing, also known as talking books or books on tape. Ebooks generally feature actors or authors reading entire works or abridged versions. They're very popular with the sightless and vision impaired, as well as with commuters. And then there's ebooks. The idea of an ebook, a digital book read exclusively on a computer, has existed since the 1970s, but the idea of commercially viable ebooks took longer to take hold. Project Gutenberg offers more than 40,000 public domain books for free. Print books are available online. The first e-readers were too heavy, expensive, and difficult to read, but Amazon produced the first popular device known as the Kindle and an e-book store. Apple and Barnes and Noble rushed their own e-readers and tablets to the market to try to compete. So what about the future of ebooks? Well, printing books on demand is probably in the future. Reviving books that would otherwise go out of print is a possibility, and avoiding the inconvenience of carrying unsold books is important with ebooks. Reimaging what a book can be, such as hosting embedded video, hyperlinks, and dynamic content, are all a possibility. Tailoring books to specific readers could be in the future. 19th century books are printed on acid-based paper, which gradually deteriorates. Libraries have developed preservation techniques in the 1970s. Because the paper in these older books do deteriorate, a recent trend has involved preservation and producing digital copies. The way to protect books is by using acid-free paper, which was developed in the early 1900s. Libraries photocopied pages onto this new paper and have stored the originals. What about censorship and banned books? Well, censorship imposed by various rulers and groups to maintain authority are often preventing people from learning about the rituals and moral standards of other cultures. As societies have discovered the power associated with knowledge and the printed word, books have been subjected to a variety of censors. The American Library Association compiles a list of the most challenged books every year. So what's a book challenge? Well, it's a formal complaint for the removal of a book from a library. Some of the common reasons for challenges include sexually explicit passages or nudity, offensive language or racism, occult themes, violence, homosexual themes, and promotion of a religious viewpoint. The organization and ownership in the book industry. A publisher can be a large company or a one-person home office operation. Like most mass media, publishing is dominated by a handful of major corporations with ties to international media conglomerates. The large companies can financially support smaller firms while allowing editorial ideas to remain independent. Large trade book publishers and independence are both struggling in the digital upheaval and dominance of Amazon.com. Small publishers can have a staff of a few to about 20 people. Medium and large publishers can employ hundreds of people in different departments: acquisitions and development, copy editing, design and production, marketing and sales, administration and business. Most publishing houses contract independent printers. Acquisition editors seek out and sign authors to contracts. For fiction, finding writers, they go through book agents or reading unsolicited manuscripts. For nonfiction, they examine manuscripts and letters of inquiry or match a known writer to a project. They also handle subsidiary rights for an author. That's selling the rights to a book for use in other media, such as a mass market paperback or as the basis for a screenplay. After a contract is signed, the developmental editor provides the author with feedback, makes suggestions for improvements, and, in additional publishing, obtains advice from members of the academic community, work with photo researchers to select photos and pieces of art. Today, 15,000 outlets sell books in the United States. There are traditional bookstores, department stores, drugstores, used bookstores, and toy stores. Book superstores began in the 1980s. They reinvigorated the business. Borders, a bookstore in Ann Arbor, Michigan, was a big influencer. Book superstores catered to suburban areas and avid readers. Barnes & Noble stocks up to 200,000 titles at one time and is the last national bookstore retail chain in the United States. Now they sell music, have coffee shops, and have live performances. The politics of books. After almost 20 years of decline, the overall rate at which adults read literature increased in 2009, with the biggest gains among young adults age 18 to 24 and Hispanic and African American populations. While the book industry can be a hard place for new authors and ideas to find success, literature has proven its power as a medium through which individuals can understand ideas and cultures outside their own experience. Books have played an important role in spreading democracy and connecting people to new ideas. Americans, yes, they're reading more, and readers are more likely to perform volunteer and charity work. Books and reading have survived the challenge of the digital culture. Well, that's a quick review of Chapter 10. I have listed this chapter's key terms and their definitions in the last few slides on this video. Feel free to pause this video to read and understand these key terms. And once you've finished this video, don't forget, this video review of Chapter 10 does not cover the entire chapter. Read Chapter 10 in your textbook, do the Chapter 10 blog assignment on the discussion board, review the Chapter 10 study guide, and prepare for your next quiz. Now, here are the key terms.